Hello, it's Tim Carter, and I'm back with another tutorial on Gary Grigsby's A World at War, A World Divided. I've decided after the first tutorial, where I talked for about an hour, that was kind of long, and so instead what I'm going to do is break up these tutorials into sort of smaller segments, each dealing with a single topic, and hopefully that way frankly, the videos will be a lot shorter and we'll get through things in a little more detail. And if viewers have particular questions, they can go to just that particular video. So today what I'm going to do is look at how combat works, specifically land combat. The general principles will apply to air or to solely air combat as well as naval combat, but there are some additional wrinkles and variables there, so I think it's worth addressing those separately. So what I've got here is the beginning of the German attack on Russia in the spring of 1941. We have two squares that are going to be the first major attacks, and that'll give us a chance to look at how ground combat works. So to begin with, let's go to the unit stats here and just look at the very basics. All of the units in the game have the same sort of types of characteristics. So if we look along the top here, they have attack factors that are determined by target, so land attack, air attack, and then obviously because this is an infantry unit, it has no naval attack, but there are 3 naval attack categories. It also has a range. Everything but artillery is 1. And then evasion, which is best thought of as your defense factor, along with durability. As far as I can tell, every unit in the game has a durability of 3, except for infantry, which has a durability of 4. So if we look at tanks here, tanks will have the benefit of armor, but their durability is actually a little less than infantry. But we're going to use infantry for this example. So the basic math underneath land attacks is if you're the attacker, you're rolling dice based on the number in your land attack factor. So here we have 6, so we're going to roll 6 dice. Let's say we're attacking the Russians, which we are here. To calculate their defense, we take their evasion, which is 4, and we multiply it by their durability, which is 4. So they have a durability or a defense of 16. If you were to average the German die roll, 6 times 3 is 18. We can expect German infantry to land at least 1 hit on Russian infantry, all other things being equal. Of course, the Germans are going to roll dice, so it might be a lot higher, it might be a lot lower. Defense is always based on a mathematical formula and is fixed. So, for instance, if we look now at armor, the German armor has a much higher attack and a much higher evasion. So he's going to do a lot better in combat, but of course, they're much more expensive and they took a lot longer to build. So the key thing to understand in combat in World Divided is that these basic sort of principles are then modified by a ton of different factors that can really swing the way battles work. Clearly from that last screen, you should be investing in your technology. You want to get those numbers as high as possible. And occasionally you want to think strategically about, well, do I want to push my evasion up because that's going to make my units more survivable? Or am I more interested in simply inflicting damage, in which case I might sacrifice my own durability for damaging the enemy. If you're the Russians, for instance, with more or less unlimited manpower, you might want to go that route, at least early in the game when you can't afford to have everything you want. So here, let's look at a square where an attack is taking place. And we'll go through how the attack plays out, as well as some of the variables that are going to affect the die rolls. There are a ton of them. I would invite everyone to look at the rule book. I'm not even sure I have all of them memorized, but basically you can go to the rules and see the entire chart. They're all logical, but some of them may sort of surprise you, especially when you first start the game. And probably the best way to learn, and we'll get into it in a sec, is to, after your battles, go look at the combat results, and you'll see where it's listed all of the things that affected die roll, and you'll be able to see, okay, did I just roll poorly, or is there some sort of underlying issue here that's causing me to get results that are perhaps worse than I would like, or for that matter, better than you'd like? So a couple of the key ones that you want to keep in mind no matter what. The biggest one that you can control as the player is the combined arms. And if we look at this, let's look at the results here, the projected results. This is obviously the first German attack against the Russians. The Germans are superior technologically and in terms of numbers, so we'd expect them to win. But this is going to be a massively one-sided battle, and it's useful to explore why, because it'll help us understand what some of the modifiers are. So you see the bottom line there in the red box says attacker qualifies for combined arms. Combined arms, which is also sometimes called the Blitzkrieg modifier, you get it when you have at least one armor, infantry, artillery, and tactical air in a square, and the other guy does not. So if we look at the Russians here, they have armor, they have infantry, they have tactical air, but there's no artillery there. So the Germans are going to get that bonus, and that bonus is +3 to their combat rolls. So that's a modifier to the die roll, and as you can sort of figure out, that translates into 1 additional attack die for all of your attacks, which is quite significant. So one thing the Russians might want to do, if they were moving units around before the beginning of the war, would be to throw an artillery in there. It's going to die for sure, but it's going to make the German rolls a bit weaker, and that might sort of help you to either have a few units survive or to have a few units, inflict damage on the Germans. Other things that are, well, actually, let's step back. So there's actually 2 kinds of modifiers, and it's useful to know the difference. So there's a whole package of modifiers that affect your evasion statistics. So this is both for the attacker and the defender. That is, they might increase a unit's evasion or they might decrease it depending on what the modifier is doing. So in this square, because the Germans are attacking a frozen political space, which is Russia, they get the benefit of the surprise attack modifier. This happens when the Japanese attack on their first turn as well, and it will then get sort of paid back to the Germans on the first Russian winter turn, where the Russians are going to get the same modifier in reverse. And it reduces in this case, the Russians as the defenders' evasion by 1. And it increases the attacker's evasion by 1, meaning fewer attacking units are going to die and more defending units are going to die. And if we go back to this table, here the Russian infantry evasion is only 4. So if you reduce that by 1 down to 3, you've taken sort of 25% of their survivability away. That's a big shift. By the way, the Russians probably want to invest some technology in improving that at some point. There's a number of evasion modifiers, and every modifier in the game stacks. So what you don't want to do is find yourself with a lot of them stacking up against you. Whereas if you're attacking, you want to kind of try to put as many of them in play as possible. Other ones that are sort of pretty common, if the defenders have rail, they're going to get die roll modifiers. I should clarify that where many modifiers go to the evasion, and this affects your core statistics, there's another whole package of modifiers that go to your die roll and just affect your attack roll. So these are things that might add +1, +2. Sometimes, for instance, an elite unit adds +4 to its die rolls, which can be huge. That's sort of 1.5 die, more or less, added to its strength, regardless of the type of unit. So you want to try to get units to elite, and you want to try to husband them. Here, for instance, the Russians, because they have active rail in this square, are going to get +2 to their die rolls. We're not super worried about that as the Germans, because we're going to shellac them anyway. But later in the game, where battles might be closer, we might want to invest the time and effort in bombing the communications network and removing that die roll modifier from the Russians before we attack. Other modifiers that are sort of common sense in bad weather turns, the defenders get a bonus in rough terrain. If we look down here at Hungary, it's rough terrain. You can sort of see the mountains on the icon. That will affect it. If units are out of supply, if units have been shot at once before that turn, there's a whole host of modifiers. And again, you can see the full list in the rules. So let's go ahead and launch this attack. We can see here the sort of key thing is probability of success 100. We know we're going to attack, or we know we're going to win, and we expect to inflict about 10 points of damage and lose only 1, which is pretty good. Yes, we are in fact going to break the peace, so that's going to affect the politics of it all. So that's actually kind of a marginal result, to be perfectly honest. The Germans suffer 1 damage. This means their fighter has lost sort of 1 step, if you will. This sends it back to the production queue, but it doesn't get completely obliterated, meaning we preserve the manpower associated with that unit, and it takes much less time to bring it back onto the map. Anything destroyed is simply gone. The manpower is gone, the units are gone, you got to build them from scratch. And those are significant losses. At crucial junctures in the game, you'll see things like, for instance, if an army is completely isolated, even if it only takes 1 step of damage or is simply forced to retreat, it's going to be destroyed. And so you get the sort of surrounding of whole armies and knocking them out. The same goes if an army needs to retreat over sea lanes and the sea lanes are blocked or the transports have been destroyed, then they're going to be destroyed even if they are only damaged or forced to retreat. So now let's go in here. If you click on the little explosion box there, this is going to give you the detailed breakdown of what happened in this battle. And this both will give you all the hard numbers if you really want them, but also at the beginning of your sort of experience with the game, it's useful to come in here and just see what was going on as a learning device. The way this works is all of the air combat is resolved. First planes versus planes, then the ground units that are defending against planes get a crack at the attacking planes. Same goes for any aircraft. Then the planes themselves will attack ground units. Once all that's sorted, artillery, which typically has a range of either 2 or 3, but it's got a better range than the other conventional land units, it gets to go. And it will typically put a lot of suppression onto the defending units. We'll get to that in a sec. Once it has resolved all of its battles, we get to just straight up, this infantry unit versus that infantry unit sort of thing. All of that is randomized. I mean, it's done by category. So obviously all air units fight against air units first. That's the rule. But which air unit attacks which air unit is generated randomly. It doesn't matter so much here. I believe it's all fighters against fighters. The only way you get a crack at enemy bombers is if you have more fighters than the other guy has escorts. But in naval battles, that sort of randomization can play a big role because you might end up with bizarre results where your battleships invest all of their time and effort in blowing up enemy destroyers and leave the other guy's battleships completely alone. And that will happen. It also happens with carrier air groups, although they have a certain weighting that causes them to prefer to attack other enemy carriers, but it doesn't always happen. So let's just randomly pick something. We'll start at the top. So here the German, and it's the attackers, they always shoot first, by the way. So if we look at this sort of bit of data, what we see is, so air attack, okay, the Germans get 6 dice, they rolled them, it came to 20. The defenders had an 18 base, and then from that they took -3 off. That is because of, immediately below that you see evasion mods, surprise -1. So as I said before, when the defenders are surprised due to sort of political factors, they lose 1 from their total evasion. And so in this case, that, because their evasion again is multiplied by their durability, that takes -3 off their defense, because it's 1, the durability of fighters is 3. So he's down to 15. 20 is better than 15, so 1 hit is laid onto this fighter. Anytime you exceed the defender's sort of evasion number or his defense factor, you land a hit. If you double it, you will land 2 hits. And one other wrinkle to keep in mind here is that there is a 5% chance that anybody shooting at anybody can land an automatic hit, or that will land an automatic hit. So no matter how weak you are, no matter how many die roll modifiers or other things have been stacked against you, your very weakest unit has a 5% chance of hitting the other guy's strongest unit. So this sort of adds a little bit of variability into the game, and occasionally, if your elite panzers get killed by Russian militia, it will cause players to cry. So We just sort of scroll through this. The other thing to keep in mind here is, in addition to the hits, this is a hit icon here, we have this second marker, which is the suppression that is laid onto a unit when it's defending. There's a math formula for this. It's something like half of your attack divided by the enemy's evasion number. So here you could see, and then again, it might even be modified beyond that. The Germans were shot at by this Russian fighter, and they took 1 suppression. The relevance there is that certain types of attacks will put a lot of suppression onto units. Here you can see the German anti-aircraft is putting a lot of suppression onto Russian aircraft. And in other instances, it will do the same thing. Oh, this looks like a Russian infantry unit. So there we go. There's our automatic hit. If we look at these combat modifiers, in a normal math equation, this guy with an air attack of 3 has no chance at all of hitting a German fighter plane, let alone a veteran German fighter plane. However, in this instance, he has rolled an automatic hit, which you can see here is reflected by his die roll having sort of 32 added to it. Now, in fact, the Germans are so much better than this infantry unit that didn't land a blow on the German plane. It just ladled a whole bunch of suppression onto him. And what that means is this suppression then becomes a modifier to the German die rolls subsequently in this turn. It does not carry over from turn to turn, but it does for the rest of that turn. This guy, here he is now, he's got 17 suppression on him. That's really going to affect his die rolls. In fact, if you look down now under combat mods, those are the combat dice, he's got a -16 to his die roll, so he's not hitting anything. Why that matters in particular is as we go down here, now all of a sudden we have all these German artillery attacking the Russians. And in many instances, they're not destroying these guys, but what they're doing is piling up suppression on them so that they become ineffective. They're not going to be able to shoot back, and they're going to become much more vulnerable to German attacks by their land units later. So a good rule of thumb is whether it's ships bombing the shore, aircraft, heavy bombers or tactical bombers, or artillery, they're all kind of softening up the defenders by piling suppression onto them. And this is both going to make your guys survive the battle more easily and inflict a lot more damage on the attackers when in fact you do get to attack. So now if we go down here, this is an interesting one. Why does he have +27 to his oh yeah, okay. So this guy has been absolutely pounded by artillery. He's got an 81 suppression, which in the context of this game is a crazy number. If you can get someone to 15, you've done pretty well. So when the German attacks him here, his attack would have been just fine. He's got an attack of 27, the defender's defense of 12, but his if you look at combat mods, target suppression +27, the Germans are getting a massive die roll modifier there, which pretty much guarantees this guy just gets steamrollered. He's been shelled so badly, he doesn't even know which way is up. And as we scroll down again, you'll see like crazy suppression numbers, huge die roll bonuses. Later in the game, you won't see numbers that big. And here again, so now here's this Russian infantry unit. He's trying to shoot at the Germans. Because the Russians are kind of behind technologically, that would have been a tough one anyway. But hey, he's got a -32 die roll modifier. He's never hitting anything. And that's just, again, because of the amount of suppression laid onto him. So if we go back to here and we just resolve that, okay, here's the political consequences of that. Russia declares war. Wow, that was loud. And the entire force in that square has been obliterated. So now let's take a look. This is Kiev, or Kyiv, as I guess I'm supposed to be pronouncing it. This attack is a little less one-sided because we're coming in from Romania, and it was difficult to get enough troops in there to really clobber this. There are various German sort of strategies for Barbarossa, and maybe I'll do a video on that at some point in the future. But again, we'll just do this. Now here we go. The Germans lost. These militia only have one step, so losing them doesn't really cause me much pain. But I lose a couple of units. The Russians lose their entire air force and another large infantry force. and the invasion of Russia is off to the races. One other thing to note here: German armor moves 2, where all other land units move 1, or everyone's armor moves 2. So the Germans, having kind of cleared the way here, then will throw tanks into here. If we wanted to get annoying, we might throw a tank there just to take out his infrastructure. This would make us vulnerable to counterattack, but early in the war, the Russians probably don't want to do that. So we do that. There's no defenders there. And then the Germans have taken Belarusia, and they are one sort of armored leap from Moscow. But we'll maybe get into the best way to attempt to take Russia and also to defend it on another video. So that's land combat. I hope that made sense. If anyone notices anything I got wrong, by all means, post it in the comments. I have played this game an awful lot, but after a while, your brain just gets into certain habits, and who knows. So I hope that's useful. Talk to everyone later.